He didn't punch him. He had a razor, and he blazed him. He cut him, cut his face. And him looking up at me, and he's like, "All right, see your ass in the yard. You better come strapped." Yeah, I'm willing to die for a candy bar. Greetings and salutations. I'm Victor Usordi, and welcome to my channel, 28 to Persevere. Thanks for watching. Hit me up with a comment, press that like button, and subscribe if you haven't already. In this video, I'm going to discuss my first full day in the Elmira Correctional Facility Reception Center, along with some of what I experienced throughout those 11 months that I was there prior to being transferred to the Auburn Correctional Facility, where I spent the next 19 years of my life. I remember the next morning, about 6 a.m., the guards did their annual rounds, that they called them, where they'd walk to see if everybody was dead or alive. They'd bang on bars, wake guys up. I was up already. I was just sitting there, stressed out, and wondering what the hell was next. And I remember them coming around, giving what they call a chow list. They were seeing who wants to go to the mess hall. Back then it was optional. Now they make it mandatory. But back then, a lot of guys wouldn't go. They would just stay in their cell, whatever. I didn't know what to do, so I was just like, okay, chow, whatever. So the cells all electronically opened at probably around 6:30 or so, and each prisoner had to be formally, completely dressed from head to toe. State greens, your state white shirt, obviously your white boxers, your state green pants, your belt. If you had a belt, a lot of people didn't. I didn't. And your socks and your boots on and whatnot. And you had to step out, and you had to stand there and look straight ahead. And then they tell you to turn, and each prisoner turned, walked single filely out. Some guys talked, some guys didn't. I didn't say a word to anybody. One thing I did notice, I was the only white guy in the entire company. And the cells, there was around 47, 50 cells, if I remember correctly. And I was the only white guy in that row. I do vividly recall that. Race was never really a huge thing to me growing up. It wasn't something that I obsessed on, or something I obsess on now. But it's very vivid in prison. Becomes a standard of life, really. Racial segregation is huge in prison, which we'll get into down the road. I'll tell you how I breached that barrier in many factors and factions. But at that point, I was just this vulnerable kid that didn't really know if he was coming or going. Wasn't really looking around me at the other people's races, or who really could give two shits, to be honest with you. I just wanted to know what was going to happen to me next, how I was going to survive that day. This is my first full day in prison, So we marched down the aisle there of the company, and we're going to the mess hall. Everybody formally goes down these stairs, and it's just getting louder and louder. People screaming from their cells, and you're walking by cells, as you're going, through the block, now hitting to the flats, as they call them, which is the bottom area, and you're walking towards the flats, and you're making your way to the mess hall, and you hear people screaming and saying derogatory things to you, and you just walk. You don't know if it's directed at you or not, whatever. But I do remember we had to walk up all these stairs, and I'm sure it's a lot different now, but there was a lot of blind spots there, and there was no cameras or anything of that nature like there is now. And I imagine it's a lot more, I guess you could say, monitored. It wasn't really monitored there. You just marched. And then I remember walking up this one flight of stairs, and I witnessed my first violent altercation that took place. About 3 guys ahead of me. And I remember, out of nowhere, this guy just turns around and hits this guy that was 2, 3 people ahead of me. Just hits him like full force, bang, punches him in the face, and doing it flying back. And then, he went with him. The guy chased me. I hit him. I just remember this kid flying by me. Another one behind me literally went forward to attack the guy that hit the other guy. So this is a full-fledged fight going on, and I was just stuck. I didn't know what was going on, what I should do or not do. And I remember the guards screaming, "Everybody hit the wall, play the wall." And at that point, I didn't know what play the wall meant, but basically put your back to the wall, because you might be next. And you don't know if somebody's coming up behind you to cut you, or whatever the case may be, or why that guy that just got his wig pushed back, as they would call it, Well, that just happened to him. But I remember there's blood all over the floor. And come to find out, the guy who I thought punched him, he didn't punch him. He had a razor and he blazed him. He cut his face pretty viciously. And I remember the guy that got cut, who I thought was punched, flying backwards, falling. And I remember looking down, I see him. And at this point, the guards were, on top of the other man, and they stopped the altercation seconds into it happening. But I remember seeing the guy. He had a huge cut on his face. And, his cheekbone was opened wide up, and I remember seeing that. He was very close to me, and I was just playing the wall. I wasn't saying anything to anyone, and who knows what that was about or whatever it was. It wasn't my business. But the reality was, I remember that was my first initiation into the violence, and there's a lot worse to come. I mean, that was mild compared to the reality of what was in store for me personally and things I witnessed and went through my own way to survive. So it's just that was my first initiation uh, into that the violent nature of this predatory mindset there, which is omnipresent. It's everywhere. It's a part of daily life. Um, After that was done, within seconds, it wasn't anything long lasting. Everybody was basically escorted back uh, to their single file line and brought to the mess hall. We went into the mess hall and we were given a tray and they were given a metal spoon. Back then, they gave us all these huge metal spoons. They no longer do that for various reasons, mostly violent. But back then, they gave us these metal spoons. And I remember getting this big spoon and walking with this tray and walking into the mess hall and we're giving your breakfast, bran flakes. I remember it. Remember it was nasty, stale bran flakes. I still remember that. Two little milks, little cards of milk. And then you had to sit down with the rest of your company, people you were escorted with, on these metal tables, little benches basically. And you just ate whatever, but you only had a very select time period to do it. Eating like a savage is, you know, uh, you learn to do. You eat extremely fast in prison because you don't have much time to eat. They don't give you a lot of time. You can't just sit there, you're not chit chatting and hanging out and eating at your luxury. This ain't, Texas Roadhouse. It's uh, it's pretty horrific. So you eat, you shovel like a madman. You're just shoveling your food. You're not thinking about anything else. And at that point, I was looking around and trying to make sense of what was going on, and I didn't know what was happening, and still wasn't really talking to anyone. I don't remember really engaging in conversation. Um, you don't trust anyone. I mean, this is the prison system. I mean, I was smart enough to know that this wasn't a place where you go to make friends and you hang out like it's a social club. Um, so I just was shoveling my food like a madman, and then we were told to leave, and whatever, when it's time to go, you got to go. And I kept seeing men get up and bang the tray, and bang the table with their spoon. I had no idea what to do. Some guys would knock, whatever. And it's basically what you're doing is you're allowing the next man, the one sitting in front of you, the one next to you, to know that you're getting up, you're moving suddenly. A lot of times, a lot of violence that would happen in the mess halls, guys would lunge or whatever. But when you would get up, you would let people know. It's a form of respect. There's little subtle respectful gestures that you learn in prison. At that point, I didn't know what the hell was going on, so I just got up, and I was watching all these other guys do this, and of course I was curious. What the hell? What is that about? By banging the table with the spoon. It became a daily way of life to the point that every time I got up, I would bang the table with the spoon or my fist. I would just knock on the table, letting everybody know, okay, I'm getting up. Especially later on after reception, I got sent to the other Max A prisons. But at this point, being a novice to this world, I was completely ignorant of any type of etiquette, prison etiquette, or what constitute respect or disrespect, or how to move, how not to move. Um, I wasn't the most streetwise kid, but I wasn't ignorant of the streets either prior to coming to prison. But I was a kid nonetheless. And right now, I was in a world where you didn't see a lot of kids in that area, in the reception area. I didn't really recall seeing anyone even remotely close to my age at that point. Um, so we were escorted out of there and to the mess hall, everybody, single file, brought back to our cells. And reception, it was basically that process. I mean, you go to your mess hall, then you go to the yard. The yard is basically once a day. You go outside to this closed in area. It's cement ground, brick and mortar all around. There was a pull ups bars, and there was no weights or anything like that. Because remember, this is the reception center. People coming and going constantly. There's no real consistency of faces, because you see faces coming and going constantly. But we went to the yards. If I remember correctly, it was like once a day, and you would go. So sometimes you would go in the morning, sometimes you would go in the afternoon, sometimes at night. It depended on when you would go, but you would all go together. I mean, you're talking like 500 men out in this prison yard, which is small compared to what what I would eventually go out to the yards with Auburn and Elmira when I was in the general population later down the road. But at that point, we all went in there, and everybody would be just walking around. Some people playing the ball, some people working out, go calisthenics, pull ups. I was just walking around. I had no idea what was going on, and wasn't really talking to anyone, wasn't really communicating to anybody, and just trying to figure out what I was going to do. There was one guy I remember who came up to me, big Indian guy. I'll never forget him, and probably the first guy I ever spoke to, and he was just enamored by my age because of how young I looked, and he asked me, my age. He was like, "Yo, what's up?" And you remember, there's a lot of predators, obviously, prison. So my mindset is, was this guy a booty bandit? Which is basically somebody who rapes vulnerable people, especially young white guys. So I was on guard, obviously, and just sitting there, very cautiously communicating with this guy. He was just, as I said previously, he was enamored by my age. He was just confounded, like, how did you get here? Where are you heading? What do you facing a long time? What are you facing? So, at that point, I willfully talked about my case. I didn't know any better. I was just, I was confused. I was like, yeah, I got 20 to life, and he was like, well, what happened? I told him my case or whatever. But I got to know this guy, and this guy wasn't a booty band or anything of that nature. He was a decent dude. He was all right, and he was somebody I got to know pretty well for about 2 weeks. I would meet him up in the yard, hang out with him, talk to him. That was his third bid. It was basically the third time he was in prison. He was an older guy. If I remember, he was like maybe mid-50s at that point. Long black hair. He was full-fledged Native American, and he was a decent guy. And under the circumstances, he he saw I was lost. I mean, he even said, you got to get your head on right, kid. I mean, you got to get your focus. You can't be, a big raging lunatic, or you can't be looking too vulnerable either, because you're going to invite chaos, and chaos will come. There are people that thrive on that here, and they will try you, and they will find out whether or not you're someone to mess with or someone to leave alone. So I obviously knew that that took place there, and I knew how violent prison could be in the sense of what I've read growing up as a kid. I didn't actually know because I never lived it, but I listened to him, and I only knew him for a couple of weeks because then he got transferred out to wherever he was going. He was a medium security prisoner, if I remember correctly, and he left, and I was stuck there, just me doing whatever, walking the yard and trying to figure things out. We weren't allowed visits for the first month, so I didn't see any of my family or anyone like that. Finally, was given a visit, and you were given the choice to have a food package. At that time, you were getting 35 pounds of food. It was strictly regulated. I mean, you couldn't have many things that you would think you could have. It was you could have canned goods back then, things of that nature. Everything was searched. I was very strict, as it still is. But I remember seeing my family for the first time, and it was emotional. I was an emotional wreck. They were emotional wreck. It was horrific. But we tried to make the best of the fact that we saw each other and had a chance to embrace. And that's mainly my mother, basically, was the first person I saw there. And then I remember getting the food package, and then I remember leaving with the food package, and I had to go pick it up, and you get these two bags, paper bags, and you have to go to a part of the prison to pick it up and go through the process of getting it searched and whatnot. And then you're given the option to discard things that you weren't allowed, or You could send it home or whatever. You have all these various options. But I got my food, and I remember going back, and it was just basically candy bars and soups, like we call crackhead soups, these little romaine soups. And I remember walking down the company. This was my first intro into the world of the predator. I remember walking down the company with my bag of food. People were screaming and yelling out, "Hey, yo, white boy, yo, let me get something, man. Hit me up, man. Hit me off. What's up? Whatever." And I just was walking straight to my cell. Wasn't really thinking about nothing. I remember this guy. I'll never forget this guy. And this story is I call the candy bar story. And there was a guy. He was on the flats, and I was on one tier above the flats, which is the first floor. And he was on the flats, and he was looking up from his cell. And black dude, older guy. I remember his eyes. He had these big eyes. And I remember him staring up at me, and he's like, yo, white boy, you send me stickers, man. Send me a candy bar. Send me a candy bar. And I remember just looking down at him, and I'm walking and looking at this guy, and he's like, yo, what you looking at, man? I said, send me something, man. Send me something. Or come out strapped. So I'm looking at him like, what? And he's like, yo, send me a candy bar. So I was like, no, man. Now I'm walking, towards myself, but I stop and I look down at him. I was like, I'm not sending you a candy bar, man. My mother gave me this candy bar. What I said. So he just like smirked, and I remember him looking at me. I remember saying, yo, man, send me a fucking candy bar. I said, you see, I'm gonna blaze you, man. I'm gonna gun you now in the yard. I'm gonna gun you down. Basically telling me he's gonna body me in the yard if I don't give him a candy bar. All right, that's the value in prison, candy bar. So he's looking at me, and I just said to him, man, I ain't giving you a candy bar, man. I ain't giving you a candy bar. So he's like, all right, you willing to die? You willing to die for a candy bar, a Snickers bar? And I remember, at that point, it was just something inside me, man. It was just like, oh, fuck this, man. I, I'm I ain't gonna be preyed on, man. Nah, that's not happening. So I was like, nah, man. Said, you ain't getting a candy bar, and yeah, I'm willing to die for a candy bar. I'm willing to die with my principles intact. I value that more than my life at this point. And yeah, I'm willing to die for a candy bar. That's how I felt. That's how I believed because I knew, because I understood, that if I don't stand up for something, then I'm gonna be vulnerable to be exploited for everything, and I'll have nothing left, my manhood, nor my life. So I remember looking down on him, saying that to him, and him looking up at me, and he's like, "All right, see your ass in the yard. You better come strapped. You better get a weapon. Meet me in the yard." Obviously, I didn't have any weapons or anything. I didn't know how to make shanks or anything of that nature at that point. I didn't know that part of the prison world firsthand yet. But I was like, all right. So I got back to my cell, and I believe that he probably didn't think I was going to go to the yard that day, which I did. I did choose to go when it was time to go. I went out to the yard. I remember going out to the yard, and I remember seeing this guy. And at first, when I went in, I didn't see anything. I was just walking in the yard. Then I went to the wall, and I played the wall with my back to the wall because I realized that was something wise to do. And I was just looking around for him, waiting for him. And then finally, I saw him. I saw this guy, and he saw me, and he was walking with a group of other guys, a bunch of black dudes. And I remember him walking by me and him looking at me, just staring at me. And I looked at him, and he just went like that. Just nodded his head. Just nodded his head. He didn't do anything. Um, but just seeing his face, it was like, not that he was respecting me or anything like that. I'm not going to jump into conclusions of that nature. But the fact that he saw that I was willing to die for a candy bar, but he didn't know my mindset. He didn't know where I was going. He didn't know anything about me. I didn't know anything about him. He could have been this killer of all killers. I didn't know, gangster of all gangsters. I didn't know anything at that point. But I was willing to die at that point in my life. I didn't have much fear of it. Honestly, I was reaching a point now as getting into the reception area, even that first week, and I was just starting to get more frustrated, angry. The sadness was being replaced by rage, and I was feeling it inside me. I was like, I don't give a fuck right now. This is how it's gonna be. This is how I feel. Um, I'm gonna fight. I ain't got no weapons on. I'm just gonna bare knuckle it and claw my way to survival. But he lied his head, Dude left me alone. He never bothered me after that. And I didn't see him really again, you know, throughout my time there. Periodically I'd see him in mess halls or whatever, but I never saw him again. But that dude, I never forgot him. You know, not to jump ahead too far, but um, there's a connective story to this, and I wanted to share it real quick. Uh, about 15, almost 20 years later, no lie, I was in I was in Auburn at the time. I'd say it was about 15 years later. And I was in the mess hall, and it's a totally different mindset, totally different person, which we'll get into down the road. But the Victor Desordi at that time wasn't the kid in 1994. I first went to prison. So I'm sitting there and I'm eating in the mess hall, shoveling food, and all of a sudden I remember, because everybody that was sitting in front of me, I quickly look up and glance to make sure who it is, if I knew the guy or not. And this guy looked at me. This guy sat down, looked up at me. No lie, it was that man. It was him. I knew those eyes, and I looked right in his face. And I had my spoon there, and it was a metal spoon at the time still. And I remember staring at him. So you got it in my mind. I'm like, you got to be kidding me! It's the same dude. And he looks up at me and gives me just a nod of his head, goes back to eating. Didn't pay me no mind. Didn't even recognize. There was no formal recognition because he did his whole bid just exploiting people predatorily. That's what he did. That's how he survived. And I imagine there was many other kids, white or black or Spanish or whatever, that he took their candy bars or whatever. He may have took their ass. I don't know who he was or what his MO was, but I knew that much, that he was a predator. But he didn't recognize me. And I had that spoon. I remember looking at that metal spoon, and all I could think about, all it's going to take for me is one quick motion, and his jugular vein was right there in front of me. His neck was vulnerable. And if I was a different mind at that point in my life, and I was a different person, and I harbored ill will for what that man attempted to do, he was done. And I remember the guy who was sitting next to me, who became a close friend of mine, or we'll get into later. I remember him looking over at me. He was like, "Vic, what's up, man?" Just, and he said this later on in that day. He was like, "What was up with you? I kept seeing you look up at this guy and you're smirking." I said, and I told him the story, what this guy was and how close this man came to meeting his maker. And obviously, I would have never gotten out of that if I would have done and reacted in such fashion. But I did have common sense in that sense, and I knew my reality, and I wasn't a cold-blooded killer, um, though I was getting cold inside and very callous, especially at that point. But I remember staring at this guy, and then when we left the mess hall that time, um, I realized how close this guy came and how close I came to ending everything at this point, and how close this reality is to how small the world is in the prison system. Everything and everyone is so interconnected. But my reception was shocking. Uh, I did eventually get to know guys. I bobbed and weaved and started to understand the ins and outs and how to move. Um, I was forced to double bunk for the first time, and I met a man there that I became close to and got to know. He was there for about 5 months. I double bunked for about 90 days. That's what you were mandated. It was mandatory. Um, it was a trial and error. Uh, there were various different people that come and go, and it was a constant uh, turnover rate. I remained, as I said, almost 11 months to a year until I was put on the draft. I was sent to the Auburn Correctional Facility. Uh, that's that would be my place of residence for the next 19 years. The abyss. But Elmira Reception was my initial stop, and it was just a wake-up call, a process of maturation that is completely abnormal and tested the bounds of rationality, um, sound mind and judgments, your ability to differentiate between what you're willing or unwilling to do, choices you make that you can't unmake. Everything was tested initially. My first time that I really believed whether or not I could survive in this environment. And that was my first experience, first night, first week, as it transgressed into 11 months, almost 12 months that I was there, until I eventually ended up on the transfer to Auburn Correctional Facility. Next video, we'll get into that, into my initial stages of first night and day in the Auburn Correctional Facility, some of the things I saw initially there that first week. But my reception was the first wake-up call. Horrific experience and initiation into the dark world that is the prison system. A place that is not fit for any man to ever live in with any sense of humanity, which you learn quick. You have to deeply understand that a person is put in a position where they either have to survive or they choose to die. And that was my mindset. I tried to hold on to my humanity and my understanding, but I realized that I needed to know what I was going to do or not do at that stage in my life. In my next video, we'll get into my first memorable day in the Auburn Correctional Facility and what I experienced that day. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and go with the gods, persevere.